Let's now begin with our top story. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has met the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing. Prime Minister Khan is in China on a three-day visit. Pakistan's Prime Minister and the Chinese President discussed bilateral relations, the regional situation, and matters of mutual interest. Earlier, meeting Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, Prime Minister Khan said the world must act to help the people of Indian-occupied Kashmir. The Chinese Foreign Ministry says Beijing hopes India and Pakistan will hold dialogue on the Kashmir dispute. Premier Li assured Khan of his country's support on all regional issues. The two leaders also agreed that the second phase of the bilateral free trade agreement will create more trade opportunities. We'll look at the latest on that. We're now joined by our correspondent, Patrick Falk. Patrick, thanks for joining us. What can you tell us, Patrick, about Prime Minister Khan's meeting with President Xi Jinping?
Well, as you mentioned, we are told that the two sides talked about bilateral relations, regional issues, as well as matters of mutual interest. Prime Minister Khan congratulated President Xi on the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic and also talked about some of the difficult economic times that Pakistan had been through and thanked China for its financial support. He also made a point of highlighting that China's friendship and support had been without condition. Of course, there was, as we understand, a focus on security issues, although we don't have an awful lot of details about what was discussed exactly. There were previous reports that said that Pakistan's army chief may have attended the meeting as well, which suggests that there was a particular focus on this. The other thing, of course, is that much has been made about why China chose to say so late on or reveal so late on details of President Xi's visit to India. Whether or not that has anything to do with Prime Minister Khan's visit, we're not entirely clear. But Foreign Minister Qureshi had previously said that the idea of this visit was to take each other into confidence ahead of President Xi's visit to India. The Chinese side will keep Pakistan informed of any relevant matters that come up during that visit.
Patrick, China and Pakistan have a big stake in what's currently happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir. How has that, do you think, figured in Chinese officials' comments during Khan's visit?
Well, I think you touched on it just a moment ago. Yesterday, Premier Li said that China supported Pakistan's rights to legitimately defend its national sovereignty and territorial integrity, although you have to understand that perhaps before President Xi's visits to China, they may not want to talk too much about what China's position is exactly, particularly if it is forceful on the matter. At the same time, we are hearing from Indian reports that they don't necessarily intend for this topic of discussion to be raised during President Xi's visit, although they said that they would help the Chinese side to understand their position if it is indeed tabled between President Modi and Prime Minister Modi and President Xi when they do meet each other.
And on that point, if you expand that last point for us, because as you know, as you've already mentioned, there will be that meeting between the Indian and Chinese leaderships soon. What will Chinese leadership be saying at that point in time when it comes to this issue of Indian-occupied Kashmir, do you think?
Look, well, we are told that the two sides are going to be talking about trade, defense and border issues. So it is likely that the matter will be brought up. To what extent, we just don't know at this time. You have to remember this is an informal meeting between the Indian and Chinese leaders. No joint statement is expected to be released, nor are there any memoranda of understanding that are expected to be signed either. And in many ways, the visit is similar to Prime Minister Khan's visit to China, in that it is very much about building the relationship between the two countries. So it's unlikely, it would seem, that China would be particularly forceful on the matter, particularly because it has an interest in trying to develop its economic and trade ties between India and China. And notably, its position over Kashmir has seemed to have softened in recent months, having opposed India's move previously. China does seem to be taking a step back and saying that India and Pakistan should sort out the issue among themselves. That's not to say that China wouldn't be willing to play the role of a peace broker in the matter.
Very well, Patrick, with that, but of course we appreciate your reporting for us. So it's Patrick Fox speaking to us there from Beijing. Well, China's military leadership, meanwhile, has supported Pakistan's stance on the occupied Kashmir dispute with India. That affirmation was made when Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff, General Qamar Javed Bajwa, met with General Han Wei-Guo of China's People's Liberation Army in Beijing. In a statement, Pakistan's military said the two sides agreed that Pakistan-India tensions will have serious implications for regional peace and stability. The military leadership agreed to enhance defense cooperation in line with the history of mutual time-tested relationship. Bajwa said Pakistan looks forward to peace, but that shall not be at the cost of any compromise on principles and the dignity of the nation. Both sides also discussed the developing situation in the Gulf region and efforts for peace in Afghanistan. Well, Indian forces have martyred two more unarmed Kashmiris in the occupied valley. New Delhi's curfew and communication blackout has entered its 66th day. The Indian Army patrolled the deserted streets, making sure businesses stay closed.
Indian forces have kept Kashmir cut off from the rest of the world. The situation is made worse by the crackdown by the Indian Army. The civilians are targeted during search operation in Pulwama district. Last week, 8 Kashmiris were martyred by occupation forces in Gandarbal district. Pakistan's UN envoy Maliha Lodi voiced her concern at the UN and highlighted the plight of the women and children in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Food and medicine are out of reach for most of the people in the valley, just like local resident Aqib.
People are suffering a lot here. If I talk about myself, I can't go to my relatives' place every day like I used to. I used to talk to them on the phone every day as well, which I can't now. There is a big gap in communication.
Earlier, 284 Indian academics, politicians and journalists have called occupied Kashmir's annexation and lockdown unacceptable. The group wrote a letter to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and asked for an immediate end to the communication blackout in the valley. They asked Modi to roll back his government's illegal decision and allow the people of Kashmir to decide their constitutional status. They called on the Indian government to immediately end the communication blackout in the valley and lift the curfew.
Pakistan has summoned India's Deputy High Commissioner to condemn ceasefire violations along the line of control. Gaurav Ahlawali was summoned after Indian troops killed a woman and wounded 3 others in the Chirikhat sector along the LOC. Foreign Office spokesman Mohammad Faisal urged the Indian side to respect the 2003 ceasefire arrangement and maintain peace. The spokesman said the deliberate targeting of civilians is a violation of international laws. He warned that the ceasefire violations by India are a threat to peace in the region. In other news, Turkey says its forces will cross the Syrian border sometime today. President Tayyip Erdogan's communications director, Fahrettin Altun, says the Free Syrian Army will join the operation. Altun says the U.S. withdrawal of troops made the way for the Turkish incursion. He told Kurdish militants in Syria to either defect or face Ankara's troops. He says the military struck the Syrian-Iraqi border to prevent Kurdish forces using the route to reinforce the region. In the meantime, the Kurdish-led SDF said 3 ISIS suicide bombers attacked its military positions in northeast Raqqa. U.S. President Donald Trump said any unnecessary fighting by Turkey will have devastating consequences for its economy. 5 European members of the UN Security Council have urged North Korea to take steps towards giving up its nuclear weapons. The Europeans have also demanded that North Korea end its ballistic missile program. An envoy from these countries issued a joint statement after a closed-door meeting of the 15-member Council on North Korea. Pyongyang test-fired a submarine-launched ballistic missile last week. After that test, Germany, Britain, and France requested the UNSC discussion. The missile launch was North Korea's most provocative move since it resumed dialogue with the U.S. last year. UN Security Council resolutions bar Pyongyang from using ballistic missile technology. European members say the recent launches are undermining regional security. Well, in the United States, the White House has refused to cooperate with the impeachment inquiry against President Donald Trump. In a letter to Congress, White House counsel Pat Cipollone called the investigation illegal and constitutionally invalid. The letter said the inquiry lacks any legitimate constitutional foundation, pretense of fairness, and due process protections. The letter implies that no additional witnesses under the administration's purview will be permitted to appear in front of Congress. President Trump is facing a congressional inquiry for seeking Ukraine's help to probe former Vice President Joe Biden. Well, the European Parliament's President David Sassoli says there has been no progress in Brexit talks. After meeting British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he said there are options for an extension or an exit without a deal. Sassoli and Johnson discussed preserving an open border between the Irish Republic and Northern Ireland after Brexit. He said the European Parliament will not agree to a deal that undermines the Good Friday Agreement. He said the integrity of the single market will also not be compromised. Prime Minister Johnson said he will not ask the EU to extend the date of Brexit beyond October 31st. Well, let's stay on topic. The minister planning Britain's no-deal exit from the EU has said the country still wants to leave the bloc with an agreement. Michael Gove says the European Union must change its position to reach a deal. Gove admits the challenges for some businesses cannot be avoided. He told Parliament the government has a strong desire to leave the EU with a deal. He said UK proposals to replace the Irish border backstop were published last week. He added the UK put forward a fair compromise for all sides that respects the Brexit referendum result.
We hope that the EU will engage with us seriously. And in setting out these proposals, we've moved. It is now time for the EU to move too. If it does, then there is still every chance that we can leave with a new deal. However, if the EU does not move, this government is prepared to leave without a deal on the 31st.
Viewers will be back with more news right after this break. Stay tuned. All right, viewers, let's now get to an earlier story as well. We were covering, of course, India now, about Indian-occupied Kashmir. All main political parties in that region have boycotted the first ever local body elections there that are scheduled for October 24th. India's top opposition party, the Congress, has also reversed its decision after pledging to participate in the polls last week. Party spokesperson Ravinder Sharma says the decision was taken in the wake of thousands of Kashmiri politicians arrested by New Delhi. Sharma expressed strong reservation over the political and security environment in the occupied valley. The NC, PDP, and CPIM had already expressed reservations over participating in the BDC polls. Well, to discuss that further, we're now joined by our correspondent, Rebecca Bundin, who is joining us now from Mumbai. Rebecca, thanks for joining us. It's been widely reported, Rebecca, as you well know, that the Indian National Congress will not be taking part in these elections on October 24th. Now, that can only really mean, right, that the BJP and independent candidates will contest these elections. And how much credibility then is really left about this entire democratic quote-unquote process?
Well, firstly, these Bloc Development Council elections in Kashmir are highly significant, given the fact that they are the first polls that are taking place following the Indian government's decision to revoke Kashmir's special status, which, of course, took away significant autonomy. Following that, there's been a near blackout on communications. There have been protests and so on. There's been a lot of controversy around that decision. So these polls that are coming up later this month on the 24th are highly significant. Now, it seems to have taken some people by surprise that the Congress has now, it seems, decided to reverse its decision to take part in these polls, given the fact that just a few days ago, just recently, Congress had said that it wanted to participate because of the fact that it wanted to strengthen democracy, and it didn't want the elections, the polls, to be a walkover for the BJP, which is the ruling party in India, of course. But now it seems to have gone back on that. It seems to be saying that it hasn't really had the interest in participation in Kashmir. People are not coming forward, and that there are, of course, a number of leaders that are still detained. So that's one of the major issues there, and that seems to be a factor behind its decision. But the BJP party just a couple of days ago was saying that it expects to secure a kind of a 90% majority. Now, I mean, something like that is looking increasingly likely as we've seen these parties backing out. It seems that it doesn't really have much competition.
Okay, so on one of the points you made, just Rebecca, about the detention of these mainstream Kashmiri politicians, how much of an issue has that become in Indian national politics?
It absolutely has become an issue, and it's been criticised by the Congress. It's been criticised by other parties as well, including the DMK in Tamil Nadu. These leaders were arrested under the Public Safety Act. That in itself is quite controversial because it's a law that allows detention of people for up to 2 years without trial. So that's been a major issue here, and a source of a lot of concern among not only other opposition political parties, but also the population, the public. It's something that's been criticised quite widely in the international media as well, especially as we're approaching these polls and so on. We can see how something like this is now having an impact and how it could have an effect on democracy. The Indian government, of course, says it has its own reasons for taking such measures, such as trying to maintain security in the region, but it's definitely become a major issue here and quite a big talking point.
And only, Rebecca, you know, there have been increasing calls even from India's Western allies, particularly the U.S., to end the curfew and the communications blackout in occupied Kashmir. How is all of that being received in India?
Well, India's response to this is always that this is a bilateral issue. Kashmir is a bilateral issue. It's something that purely has to be handled between India and Pakistan, and it really has been quite negative about any kind of attempts to interfere or advise the country on what it should be doing. So that's really been its continued stance on this matter, and with factors such as the media, the blackout on communications, and so on. The Indian government has said that it's taking these steps because of security issues, that it wants to try to limit protests, that it wants to try to limit security concerns in the region. But it's definitely maintained that stance that it is a bilateral issue, and it seems to want to handle it very much internally within the country.
Rebecca, as always, we appreciate your reporting for us. That was Rebecca, who was speaking to us there from Mumbai. Let's move on with the news now. Canadian-American cosmologist James Peebles and Swiss scientists Michel Mayor and Didier Queloz have bagged this year's Nobel Prize for Physics. Peebles was honored for his contributions to the field of universe evolution and helping understand the Earth's place in the cosmos. Mayor and Queloz were awarded for their discovery of a planet around a sun-like star. The winners will share the prize money of nearly $1 million. On to France now, where farmers around that country are blocking highways with their tractors in protest at the government's agricultural policies. Farmers are calling for just trade policies and have denounced the government's treatment of the agricultural sector. More on that now in this report.
French farmers have been concerned ever since the country's parliament approved an EU-Canada trade deal in July. A road blockade is the first in a series of demonstrations planned by two French farmers' unions.
It is important that the consumer takes action, meaning he must be coherent with what he wants, what he purchases, and this is very important.
Farmers have been angered by another trade deal signed between the EU and the Mercosur bloc. Under the deal, they say France has agreed to food imports that will put them into poverty. The French Transport and Environment Minister has sided with farmers.
I cannot endorse agri-bashing. I think farmers must be respected, for their job is difficult, and we must accompany them in adopting practices that are more environmental friendly.
The French Yellow Vest protests have only recently lost steam after they began in October last year. But with the farmers' protest movement just starting, it seems French President Emmanuel Macron's government still has a long way to go to calm its critics and solve the unrest.
Well, the International Monetary Fund's new managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, has issued a warning on global growth. Georgieva says trade conflicts have thrown the global economy into a synchronized slowdown, and they must be resolved. IMF chief says the world economy is set to see its slowest growth in nearly a decade. In her first speech as IMF managing director, Georgieva said grinding trade disputes are undermining the global economy.
Today, even more of the world economy is moving in sync. But unfortunately, this time growth is decelerating. To be precise, in 2019, we expect slower growth in nearly 90% of the world.
Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. All right, we're going to leave it there for now, viewers. Thank you very much for watching this bulletin here at Indus News.